An African man once sat on the throne of the most powerful empire on earth. He didn't inherit it. He didn't marry into it. He took it from men who were already inside Rome, already Roman, already waiting their turn. And almost nobody outside a history classroom has ever heard his name. Here's the question this video is going to answer. How does a man born 3,000 kilometers from Rome, treated for his entire career as somehow less Roman than men he outranked, end up ruling the empire that doubted him? By the end of this, you'll know exactly how he did it and exactly what it cost him to keep it. His name was Septimius Severus, and this is a story that Rome's surviving historians often told through the eyes of the people who had lost to him. If that's the kind of history you came here for, subscribe. We're about to go somewhere your textbook skipped. On the last day of 192 AD, Emperor Commodus, paranoid, unstable, obsessed with gladiatorial combat, was strangled in his own bath by his own wrestling partner. What followed, over the first 3 months of 193 AD, was a crisis Rome had never faced. His successor, a reformer named Pertinax, lasted 86 days before the Praetorian Guard killed him too. And then Rome did something so shameless that later historians could barely bring themselves to write it down plainly. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own bodyguard, auctioned the throne of Rome to the highest bidder. Not offered, not negotiated, auctioned like livestock. A wealthy senator named Didius Julianus outbid his rival and won. He didn't inherit an empire. He purchased one, the way you'd purchase a shipment of grain. Here's the part that mattered more than the auction itself. 3 men on 3 different frontiers watched this happen, and each reached the same terrifying conclusion. If the throne could be bought in Rome, it could be taken by whoever brought the strongest army to Rome's front door. One of those 3 men commanded the legions along the Danube. He wasn't from an old Roman family, and he wasn't sitting in the Capitol waiting for a summons. He was already holding a sword. His name was Septimius Severus, and when he heard what had just happened to his empire, he made a decision that took him less than a day. He would take the throne, not ask for it, take it. Within weeks, he was marching south, and the men waiting inside Rome's walls were about to learn the single most dangerous thing about him. He wasn't coming to join their system. He was coming to take control of it, and the system that had failed them was about to look very different. Now, most documentaries stop the momentum dead here and spend 10 minutes on his childhood. We're not doing that. Here's what you actually need to know, and why it explains everything that comes next. Severus was born around 145 AD in Leptis Magna on the North African coast. Not a backwater, but one of the wealthiest port cities in the entire Mediterranean world. His father's family belonged to the local elite of Leptis Magna, while his mother's family had Italian roots. His education was exactly what a future Roman senator was supposed to receive. And this is the part we're slowing down for, because it's more interesting than the simple version. Severus wasn't an outsider looking in. He was a Roman citizen, a Roman aristocrat, fully entitled to everything that status was supposed to guarantee him, and parts of Rome's elite still treated him as provincial, foreign, not quite one of them. Ancient writers even commented on his accent, and not kindly. That's the real story here. You could hold every qualification, meet every legal standard of belonging, and still be quietly reminded that some rooms in Rome weren't built to fully accept you. He learned that lesson early, and by every surviving account, he never forgot it. He never made a speech about it, never protested it publicly. He redirected it. And by 193 AD, that redirected ambition had become something no senator's opinion could touch. An army that would follow him anywhere. Rome had just handed him a reason to use it. Severus moved faster than anyone in Rome thought possible. While his rivals in Syria and Britain were still gathering support and weighing their options, he was already on the road. Julianus, the man who'd bought the throne, realized in real time that he had purchased something he couldn't actually defend. The same Praetorian Guard that had sold him the throne abandoned him rather than fight for it. The Senate turned against him within days. He was executed before the month was out. Septimius Severus, the general Rome's elite had never taken seriously, walked into the Capitol not as a petitioner, but as its new master. But taking Rome was the easy part. Two rival emperors were still alive, still commanding real armies, and both of them had every reason to despise him specifically. And Severus was about to do something to consolidate power that would define the rest of his reign, something far more calculated than the march itself. Severus didn't just punish the Praetorian Guard that had murdered one emperor and sold the throne to another. He dismissed it entirely. Every man who had held that privileged position and rebuilt it from scratch using soldiers pulled from his own loyal legions, a new force twice the size of the one it replaced. It wasn't simply a changing of the guard. It changed the character of the force itself, from an entrenched palace institution that had made and unmade emperors for a generation, into a body of men who owed their entire position to one man. Think about what that actually means. The unit that had spent a generation deciding who got to rule Rome, remade in a matter of weeks by someone they'd have dismissed as a provincial outsider a year earlier. It wasn't just discipline, it was a message written in the clearest language Rome understood. The old networks no longer decided anything. But Severus still had two rivals standing between him and total control. And he was about to make a promise to one of them that history still isn't entirely sure he meant. Pescennius Niger held Syria with a battle-tested army. Clodius Albanus held Britain with a legitimate claim of his own. Severus couldn't fight both at once, so he didn't try. He offered Albinus the title of Caesar, heir apparent, a partnership, maybe even a future. Here's the part that should unsettle you a little. In every surviving account, Albinus appears to have believed it. Whether Severus ever intended to honor that promise is impossible to know for certain. But what happened next makes the calculation hard to miss. The war against Niger was brutal and long. City by city, engagement by engagement, Niger's position collapsed until he was finally defeated and killed. One rival down, and almost as soon as Niger was dead, Severus moved against the man he'd called an ally. He revoked Albinus's title, publicly named him an enemy of the state. The partnership, real to one man, at best a convenience to the other, was over. Albinus had no path left except war. Both men began marching toward a valley near a city called Lugdunum. What was about to happen there nearly ended Severus's entire story before it had properly begun. February 197 AD, Lugdunum, modern Lyon. Look at what's actually facing each other across this valley. Not Rome against a foreign enemy, Romans against Romans. Same armor, same standards, same training, about to kill each other over who gets to wear the purple. The battle began, and for hours neither side could break the other. Then something happened that rarely makes it into the popular version of this story. Severus's own line began to collapse. Cassius Dio gives us the most dramatic version. Severus lost his horse and found himself in serious danger as his own men began to flee around him. The details come from an ancient source written decades later, so we shouldn't treat every detail as eyewitness fact. But the battle itself was real, brutal, and decisive. Sit with that for a second. The man who outmaneuvered two rivals, who took Rome without a real fight, who rebuilt the most powerful guard unit in the empire around his own loyalists, was, for a few minutes on a foggy morning in Gaul, in genuine danger of becoming exactly the kind of forgotten footnote everyone had assumed he'd remain. Then his cavalry, under an officer named Leptis, hit Albinus's exposed flank. The line held. The battle turned. And within minutes, it was Albinus's army that was collapsing. Albinus fled. There was nowhere left to go. According to the surviving accounts, he took his own life rather than face capture. Severus had won. The last rival was gone. There would be no fourth emperor, no negotiation, no compromise. But winning the throne was only half the victory. Now he had to decide what to do with everyone who'd bet against him. And Rome was about to learn that this man did not forgive easily. Severus didn't forget who had backed Albinus. Around 30 of Albinus's most prominent senatorial supporters were executed. Properties were confiscated. Families that had survived generations of emperors discovered, in a matter of weeks, that their wealth had never actually protected them. Here's what actually changed underneath the brutality. Under Severus, men from the provinces, from Africa, from the East, from anywhere outside Rome's oldest families, were increasingly the ones holding real power. Severus had just demonstrated something Rome's old aristocracy had spent centuries treating as unthinkable. You didn't need an ancient name to rule the empire. You needed loyal soldiers, and you needed to win. Her name was Julia Domna, Syrian-born, from a family of hereditary priests. Formally educated in a way few Roman empresses ever were, surrounded by philosophers and physicians, she personally gathered at court. She frequently accompanied Severus on campaign, and her public honors increasingly connected her to the imperial family and the army. She eventually received the title Mater Castrorum, Mother of the Camps. Together, they put something at the center of Roman power that Rome had never fully reckoned with. A household that was African, Syrian, and Italian all at once, running the empire that claimed to define what Roman even meant. Their two sons would inherit that throne, and inherit the tension buried inside it too. That's a story dark enough to deserve its own hour. Tell me in the comments if you want it. Severus poured a fortune back into the city that raised him, the same city Roman senators once treated as a mark against him. A new forum, a basilica, colonnaded streets among the most ambitious anywhere in the empire. He wanted the empire's capital to look south and see exactly where power now also lived. He died at York in 211 AD, still on campaign. His reported final advice to his two sons was simple, and in hindsight, quietly devastating. Be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, and scorn everyone else. They would manage exactly one of those three things. He wasn't a good man by most measures we'd use today. He executed his enemies. He rebuilt the Senate around men loyal to him. He built his power in part on the deaths of two other Romans. But here's the part worth sitting with. Perhaps Rome didn't forget Septimius Severus because his story was unimportant. Perhaps it simply became easier over the centuries to keep telling Rome's story through its most familiar names, and harder to make room for the man who changed what a Roman emperor could look like. So here's the question I'll leave you with, because I don't think it's really about Severus at all. If a man from North Africa could rule Rome nearly 2,000 years ago and still end up this far outside the story we usually tell, how many other names slipped out the same quiet way? If you want to find out, I'm not done digging. Subscribe to Untold Histories TV. The next one might be even harder to explain.